Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagele. In today's episode, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I run the max effort method. Right? Max effort is one of the three main methods of conjugate training, and it's what really develops strength and the ability to produce a great amount of force. And so I want to talk through kind of how I run that and how I can do so without, tearing down the joints and tearing down the body. But ultimately, how is that method actually implemented, right? There's a lot of myths and there's a lot of misconceptions about this. And so I want to just kind of deep dive into what this method is, how to employ it, how to get the most from it, and how to use it, whether you're like an everyday athlete, someone who plays pickleballs on the weekend, someone who picks up basketball, someone who, just wants to be strong and look jacked. And then maybe you might be a little more competitive. Maybe you do truly compete in like a hybrid event, or you might be a football player, or even, a power lifter. So how can you use this method appropriately and effectively to develop that strength component? So in terms of what this method can give, right? First and foremost, a stronger squat, a stronger deadlift, right? We're going to get stronger in the movements that we're training. And this one is going to use squat variations and deadlift variations to do so. We're also going to get better longevity outcomes, right? We're going to have stronger knees. We're going to have stronger backs. We're going to have stronger posterior chain. Our glutes are going to be stronger, right? We're going to be able to produce force. And if something does come up where we do, especially as we age, do start to experience more, bone injuries, more bone fractures, right? Having that heavy loading is going to slow the progression of some of that bone deterioration and that bone loss that we get as we age. And also just being more strong is going to set us up in the long term. And then last but not least, the performance outcomes, right? We're going to be able to produce force better in all elements, right? Whether we're sprinting, whether we're doing agility, change of direction work, whether we are needing to be strong, right? Having a higher level of strength is going to set us up for better outcomes when it comes to those types of movements. So the max effort method is something that I program routinely in all of my programs, the Peak Performance, Peak 3X, even the hybrid or more of my competitive hybrid, athlete programs use this method. Okay. And I've used it myself. The conjugate method I've used for over the last 7-8 years. And I've seen tremendous results with it. And I want to just kind of go through how I've used it, how I program it, and really what it is. So let's start with what it is and what it's not. So today we're talking using the max effort method for training the lower body and developing lower body strength and force production. Okay. I'm going to use squat variations. I'm going to go over some deadlift variations, some good morning variations, and how we can use these lifts in the gym to then lead to better force production outside of the gym. All right. I'm not talking hypertrophy today. I'm not talking conditioning. This is going to be purely about developing raw strength. So in future episodes, we are definitely going to be discussing more speed work, more dynamic effort work. I'll even touch on max effort for the upper body, right? But today I want to really focus our conversation around how do we use the max effort method with the lower body, squats and deadlifts, okay? Because this, I've done an episode on squatting and squatting heavy and squatting heavy fast, right? This is one of those components, the squatting heavy, and it's going to make you tenfold more athletic if you are stronger, right? In all elements, you're going to be more athletic by having a stronger lower body, a stronger squat, a stronger deadlift, and just being able to use and transfer that force appropriately. So let's first define what max effort is, right? What does this mean? Okay, so max effort method is going to be lifting at or incredibly close to your absolute max for a given variation. So what do I mean by at, right? 100% would be max effort, right? True 100% max effort. But we're going to use anywhere from 90 to 100% of your true 1RM. So if you've measured it or you've estimated it or you've been able to kind of just through training know where your 1RM is, this is it, okay? The other way is kind of through establishing a new heavy top set. So a 1RM, sometimes a 2 or a 3RM, something that's called kind of an estimated repetition max for that specific variation. So you may know your barbell, straight barbell back squat, 1RM, but you may not know your safety squat bar 1RM. You may not know your rack pull 1RM. Okay. So on the day, we're going to kind of work up to finding out what that is. And we'll kind of talk, from an RPE effort, from an RPE viewpoint, how we're using, not knowing your true 1RM to still get the benefit of true max effort training. The intent with this type of work, and I've talked to folks from Westside, I've listened and really kind of dove into a lot of what they've written and what they've said over the years. The maximal strain is the intent of this type of work. It is strain. Okay, your max effort, your 1RM for a given lift may be, let's just say, 405 pounds. Okay, but on the day, you might be a little tired. You might be a little fatigued. You might just be a little sore from whatever is happening, right? So basing max effort method off of that 405 may not be appropriate. You may only be able to hit 395 for a solid true 1RM, and that's okay, right? Because we're just trying to get strain. And I'll talk about what I mean by strain here in a minute. But the goal is not fatigue by volume. It is by straining incredibly hard for a single repetition. Okay. There's other programs. There's repetition schemes like 5x5 that do develop strength, and they do a really good job of it. I'm not dogging on those, but this is not 5x5. This is not, 3 sets of 3 or 5 sets of 3. This is one singular rep, as hard and heavy as you can get it. Okay. This isn't like just a normal leg day where we're just pushing hard and we're getting really, really sore from doing this type of work. No, all about one all-out effort on a very hard variation, followed by the smart accessories that come from that. So what adaptations does this type of work target? So the first is going to be high threshold motor unit recruitment, right? You are forcing your nervous system to call on every available muscle fire that it can to be able to produce the force that it needs to. Okay. The second is going to be rate coding and firing frequency. So here we're training the nervous system to better be able to fire those units faster and in better synchronicity, right? And more, in better sync with each other. We're also going to train intramuscular coordination, right? Learning how to be able to organize the force through the actual pattern that you're training, right? That's hips, that's the trunk, that's the foot pressure, the bar path, all of these different things. We're going to be, requiring more coordination, and we're going to be developing and adapting that as we train with this method. And then the last one is intermuscular coordination. So how does the posterior chain and the quads and the trunk, how do they all share the load without dumping it into the one weak link? Because we all have weak links, okay? If you've squatted for a long enough period of time, you know that you're weak in certain areas of the movement. You know that maybe your low back or your glutes are a little weaker than your quads or your hamstrings, okay? We're going to train that to all work as one unit better and be able to kind of coordinate amongst each other. So you're not just getting strong legs, right? You're gonna be able to develop all of these other muscles, these little muscle groups and these bigger muscle groups to work better together. And you're going to teach your whole body how you can apply that force under load without folding over and collapsing under the weight. Okay, so now why does this matter, right? Why is this important for you as an everyday athlete, a recreational athlete? As someone who just wants to look good with their shirt off, or be able to play with their kids on the weekend, right? The reason that this matters is from a longevity standpoint and just from a performance standpoint. Okay, having stronger max output is going to equal a bigger ceiling everywhere else. So think about it from this way, right? Whenever we're sprinting, it's going to go up because your sprint speed is now going to go up because you can hit that first step quicker. You can jump higher, right? Picking up your kid without your back hurting or your back barking out, you're going to be able to handle the little things and the bigger things in life much more efficiently because you are stronger, especially in the lower body, the legs, and then also that trunk and that posterior chain. The other factor is your max effort your max strength, as that starts to go up, then your sub-max work is going to feel easier. Okay, one of the best ways to get better at the NFL Combine 225-pound bench press is to raise your max, right? Because now instead of 225 being 85% of your 1RM. If you can get stronger, 225 may be 50%, right? And think about it. You can just rep that out more because it's just a less relative load compared to whenever you are weaker, right? So just think through it that way. As your max strength goes up, that submax work is going to feel easier. The other factor is your joints, right? Training under a controlled heavy strain can teach you how to brace. So whenever we go to pick stuff up, right, we're helping our friends move and we got to bend down and pick up the couch. We know how to brace. Our body knows how to work to be able to pick that up without you getting injured, without you throwing out your back, right? We can now respect these positions under load much better. And ultimately that leads to better protection and less danger in the gym and elsewhere in life. Okay. So that's some of the kind of the background, the science that goes into it. Now let's talk through how I actually run max effort work over the course of a training week. So a typical split structure for me, if I'm going to use kind of the true traditional max effort training, is going to be 1 day of max effort lower and 1 day of max effort upper. Now today we're focusing on max effort lower, but I just wanted to make that kind of known. So usually Mondays tend to be the max effort lower day, right? That allows us to recover. We usually have, maybe an extra day over the weekend. We have a day kind of in between if we take Tuesdays off. And so we can allow our lower body to recover for at least 72 hours from the prior session. And so this is when we're hitting kind of that heavy hinge or that heavy squat for the week. Okay. That second max effort day is more of an upper body day. Usually will be programmed on more of a Wednesday. Even if I'm running kind of my full body split, I'm going to run max effort lower on Monday, max effort upper on Wednesday, and then do my dynamic effort work on the Friday. So typically kind of within a session itself, right? I'll start with the max effort work first. After we've gone through a thorough 10, 15 minute warm up, we'll hit max effort work, kind of working up to that one singular repetition, and then we'll break down and do some accessories. And that's using kind of the repeated effort or even the submax effort methods there. So usually, kind of like I said, first of the week is when we're the freshest. So I slot that in there. We can do it whenever we're not kind of trashed from other training that we've been doing. Usually we're kind of recovering and nice, relaxed coming out of the weekend. And so I'll program that early on in the week. I don't want to do this at the end of the workout because then we just start to lose the benefit of this type of work. And then also we start to increase the risk of injury from doing this type of work. If we're fatigued because we've done a lot of volume before we do this, and then we come in and we hit a singular 1 rep, high strain movement, then we're just increasing the risk of you actually injuring yourself by doing this type of stuff. It's not dangerous, right? There is risk involved, but it's not like this type of stuff is dangerous when you do it correctly and kind of knowing your body, knowing what feels good. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but knowing kind of when to back off is important, but knowing that this is generally going to be very safe and very effective for you is important to know. So in terms of frequency, most normal athletes, I'll dedicate 1 max effort lower day per week. That's it. That's all we need. The recovery from it is pretty, long. Like I said, usually about 72 hours we want between sessions anyways. And so 1 heavy lower body day, and then we'll do our dynamic and our speed work later on in the week. You don't need to max squat and max deadlift heavy in the exact same week, right? So we'll make sure that we pull that out. Okay. We might squat on our speed days and deadlift on our speed days, but we're going to choose 1 variation and we're going to train that on the max effort day. Again, the cost to the central nervous system is very high with this type of work. And so we want to respect that and be able to control the frequency and just know that we're hitting the units that we need to, backing down, recovering, and then doing it again the following week. So now what does the actual session look like? And I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but we'll go through, I want to go into a little bit more detail. So we'll start with kind of a 10, 15 minute prep warm up using the prime method, something that's intentional at activating and going through the different patterns. not just like random stretching, not just, kind of doing some of these and some of those. We're going to go through this in a methodical way. And then we'll back it down a little bit and go to some more, prep, like sled drags, reverse sled drags. We'll do some hip mobility, hip airplanes, things that are going to work on both the mobility and the stability aspect of this. Maybe bracing, trunk stiffness drills. We can like do breathing and breath work. And then we'll eventually finish up with, we might do a jump. We might do, something that's a little bit more dynamic. But then we'll finish up by doing ramp up sets. So something that is getting us progressively heavier as we get to the main lifts. I might do 5 sets of, so say my variation of the day is a safety squat bar box squat. I might do a total of 5 sets of that movement, but just one at my true kind of max effort. So I'll start maybe 50% and I'll hit five reps, and then I'll do 65%. I'll do 5 reps, and then I'll do 70% and I'll do 3, and just so on and so forth until I kind of get to that point where I know that this next set is going to be able to allow me to strain through the movement, and that I need to back off at that point. I'm not going to go anymore. Okay, so the warm-up is a huge part of the lift, right? We need to drive that home, that the warm-up is very important for this type of work, especially in terms of staying healthy, but also just improving your ability to sometimes get into the bottom of a squat better. Maybe, prepping kind of the low back and how different muscle groups are firing. We don't want to skip that. We want to be able to use that almost as a rehearsal for the lift that's coming up later. So once we've got the warm-up out of the way, now we're going to get into that main lift, okay? This is the max effort movement. So we'll pick one variation on the day. Okay. We'll ramp up, like I said, maybe singles, doubles, triples, but slowly kind of reversing that until we hit a heavy top set of 1 rep. Okay. It can be a true all out 1 RM for that variation that day. It can be a technical max, basically when your rep stops because position is starting to break down. Or we can stretch that to more of a heavy 2 to 3 repetition max if you're not yet ready for singles. And I'll touch on that here in a second. But for most people, right, chasing an ugly grinder single week after week is dumb. Okay, you don't want to max out every single week because that's when form starts to break down. We don't want to miss lifts ever. Okay, we want to live in heavy 2s and heavy 3s. You'll still get the adaptation from just doing the 1 or the 2 or the 3, and you're going to stay healthier, whether you're doing true max effort or more of a sub-max 2 or 3. So focus on that and focus on the intent of the movement. If we're straining through the lift, if we're putting through maximal intent, you're going to get the best bang for the buck out of that. Okay. If you're grinding through a rep to get one more, repetition out of it, that's not the intent behind this type of stuff. Okay. That's ultimately going to either lead to injury or lead to, lack of progress from this. Once we've got the max effort variation out of the way, then we'll go through our accessories. Okay. Here we might do, maybe if we're squatting and we need more volume, right? Sometimes we just need more volume, especially if we're trying to grow. I may take that SSB box squat, we'll do that for a solid 1 repetition, and we'll back down, and I might do like a goblet, front squat for 5 reps, 10 reps, 15 reps. Okay. Just to get more volume from that. So that way I'm still going through the pattern and I'm getting more volume in that pattern, but it's not nearly as fatiguing. Doesn't carry nearly the same amount of risk as the max effort variation that we chose. Okay. We'll use RDLs. We'll use good mornings with a safety bar. We'll do maybe like a hip thrust variation, maybe even a kettlebell swing, something that's, very posterior chain and very hinge heavy. I'll usually do a unilateral day, or a unilateral variation on this day, right? So like a Bulgarian split squat, a reverse lunge, even a step up, whether it's lateral or straight on step up. Again, I want to hit some type of single leg variation every single week. And so max effort day is generally the day that I'll do that. I might do it on dynamic effort day too, but we'll definitely hit it on this day. If it's not a run heavy program, okay, we're going to definitely hit the hamstrings pretty hard. The reason I don't, right, and this is a whole nother conversation, but if we're doing a run focused program, where our running volume is higher, I'll typically will scale back the hamstring work, just because kind of the fatigue that those get. You just start to run, especially for us men, like we start to run the risk of hamstring injury. So we'll pull that back. But if that's not the case, right, we're going to hit them directly. Okay, we're going to do Nordic regressions. We're going to do, my favorite is like the glute ham raise. We'll even do banded leg curls. If you've got a leg curl machine, whether it's seated or lying down, this is a great day to hit that. And then we'll finish that session with trunk musculature bracing work. Okay, so something that's, whether it be heavy carries, it might be heavy sandbag holds, front rack holds, suitcase carries. I love like the ab wheel rollouts, things that are kind of emphasizing anti-flexion, anti-rotation. That's what we're going to program at the end of the session to kind of round that out. So again, kind of going through this, I don't generally program conditioners following this type of work. If I'm going to, it's going to be a sled drag, because the recovery benefits that I think you get from dragging a sled forward, backward, laterally, is going to be more beneficial. But, for something like that, that's when we're going to hit, just literally go out and drag the sled for 500 feet, 500 meters, whatever it might be. And just you start to kind of prep recovery, but you're also getting a little bit more cardiovascular benefit from doing that type of stuff. So I want to talk, to kind of, start as we start to finish this up. I want to talk through max effort lifts and what the variations are that we'll generally kind of use, and how I kind of will go through those different options, the logic behind that. And so, rotation with this type of stuff is the game, right? That is one of the biggest things that you're going to learn from using this is you can't train the same movement week in and week out. Okay. You should not hit the same bar, the same stance, the same depth week after week for months on end. Okay. One, you're going to stall. Two, you're going to get beat up, and you're also just going to lose progress. Okay. So I will rotate lifts every 1 to 3 weeks. Again, always chasing a PR, but a PR in that variation. Okay. Not just the comp squat, not just the single movement that we want to PR, and we're going to chase that PR every single week from this. So, and ideally we see those PRs go up, right? You may not train a variation for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months. We're going to come back. Hopefully now we've gotten stronger and we've seen the progression from that. So some examples, I've literally sat down before, and wrote out the different variations for exercise libraries for some of the programs that I've written. And I think I came up with like over 50 variations, right? Because you can go low box, you can go medium box, you can go high box, you can go with chains, without chains, bands, without bands. You can do, the safety squat bar, you can do the cambered bar, you can do the, the buffalo bar. The variations are literally endless, right? So, but some of my favorites, some of the ones that I use the most, I'm going to just kind of go through those, and then that way you can start to see what I use. You don't need to go through that extreme, right? If you're training that many variations, you're probably missing the mark. Probably a good idea to choose maybe 5 or 6, rotate through those, right? If you're rotating every 3 weeks, then by the time you get back to that one, it's been maybe 2 months, and now we hope to see that movement or that variation has gotten better. You've gotten stronger in that without even training it. Ideally, that's the goal. So first and foremost, the low box squat, that wide stance, pushing the hips back, chest up, right? That teaches posterior chain loading. That teaches the shin control, and it's great for your knee health, right? This is, if you're a raw lifter, if you're a field athlete, the low box squat with a wide stance is going to be, a great variation for you. Another favorite variation is the safety bar squat. So the SSB uses, that where you kind of have to hold the bar in front of you, right? But it forces the upper back forward. So you've got to kind of train to stay upright throughout the movement. Really exposes weak posture, but it's much easier on the shoulders. So if you've got tight shoulders, or you're a baseball player, or someone who, just goes through a lot of repetitive movements with their shoulders, power lifters are this way because they bench so much that they get tight shoulders, right? Can't even grab the bar. This variation is great for that type of stuff. Again, you can go to a box, you can go free, you can go to a pin, you can go to the, whatever you've got. But those are the kind of my 2 favorite variations. You can do it with the front squat. Little more demanding, a little more challenging, especially if you're not used to front squatting, right? Because there's definitely a learning curve. We talk about like with the wrists and with the hands, a lot of people will kind of get some, not necessarily injuries, but just soreness and things like that through the wrists by doing it. And so you may not truly hit a true max effort if you're not comfortable in that. So find something that's comfortable. But the front squat, again, demands an upright torso. It demands quad strength. It allows you to kind of get better out over the toes, right, with the ankle and the knee position. But those are kind of the three main squat variations that I'll use. In terms of trap bar deadlift, conventional deadlift, sumo deadlift, okay? These are three different variations that we can use. We don't have to train squat and deadlift in the same week. We shouldn't, right? So maybe one week we go squat, next week we go deadlift. Maybe we go 2 squat weeks in a row and then deadlift, and then 2 squat weeks and then deadlift. Nonetheless, right, a trap bar deadlift is going to be my go-to here. Ideally with like a higher or low handle, you can change it up. But huge total force output from this. It's more closely resembling a squat than a deadlift, more than a hinge, I should say. But the trap bar is great from this. You're developing that grip strength. You're developing that posterior chain because it's having to force through that movement. Conventional deadlift from the floor. Okay, again, that's a classic posterior chain test. The sumo deadlift kind of teaches hip internal rotation, strengthens your adductors, the growing strength, torso positioning. If someone is coming to me with maybe some back pain, I'm going to lean them more towards the trap bar and towards the sumo deadlift. Let's strengthen that without compromising. If they can conventional deadlift from the floor, get into that position comfortably, then we'll go from there. Other options, especially whenever you start to go through these movements and you start to see, I'm weak in the hole of a squat, right? You go down and you're weak on the way back up, or maybe you're weak on the lockout, especially in the deadlift. That's where a lot of people, they can get it off the floor. They just can't get it past the knees and up to where they lock out the position. So we can do deficit deadlifts where we overload that bottom position. That's that starting strength that we get. We can do rack pulls, block pulls, different variations, play with it, choose what works for you, what you have access to. Maybe you don't have access to an SSB. Okay, we can still use a bar. Maybe you don't have access to a box. Do we have spotter arms, right? Can we go down to the arms and then come back up? That takes that kind of, it kind of gets you unloaded at the bottom and then allows you to accelerate through at the top. So know what works, kind of go through. It's really great working with a coach because they can watch you do the movement, right? If they can watch you back squat with a barbell, just a free, a free back squat, and then know, okay, this is where you're weak. You were weak at the lockout. You were weak at the midway point. You were weak at the bottom. This is how we're going to train that, okay? A good eye, someone that they can see the stuff. But if you know what you're weak at and you know what's going to work to get you stronger in that area, then train that and focus on that. So how long should you stick with these variations? Okay. Ultimately comes down to you, comes down to how you recover. But for most beginners, intermediates, people who are kind of new to this type of stuff, 2 to 3 weeks is probably going to be the sweet spot here. Trying to beat what you did last week by maybe 5 or 10 pounds, or maybe you add an extra repetition to maximize that strain. If you're doing more than 3 reps, you're not straining hard enough. So try to stick between 1 to 3 reps here. But that's kind of the goal, 2 to 3 weeks. If you're new, especially new to this movement, new to this method, if you're a little bit stronger, a little bit more advanced, then you're going to have better bar speed. You're going to, get more CNS exposure by lifting heavier weights. So there 1 week and then rotate to the next week with a new variation, right? Hit it hard, log it, record what you hit, and then move on. Let's go with a different variation the following week. Okay. Ultimately, the stronger that you are, the faster that you adapt. Okay. The faster that you adapt, the faster you can stagnate. So if we're always adapting, right, we're never going to be able to recover from that type of stuff. So rotation matters, especially as you get stronger with this type of stuff. So now let's talk numbers to kind of finish this up, because this is where a lot of people start to go off the rails. We've already gone through these, but I just want to really highlight what max effort is by the numbers. Okay, so in terms of loading, in terms of the intensity, when to shut it down, okay, how heavy should max effort work be? All right, that target zone is 90 to 100% of your best for that variation on that day. It doesn't mean your all-time PR that you hit 3 years ago, That doesn't mean what you think you can hit on the day, 90 to 100% of your best for that day. Okay, you're working in sets of 3, then 2, and then singles, right? I talked about kind of loading up to that heavy single, okay? This is the everything that I got while still being able to hold my positioning, still being able to maintain my form throughout the movement, okay? Again, technical max is where the position is still clean. Your bar path was clean. Everything was controlled. Your knees didn't, start to go all over the place. Your back didn't start to fold over. That is technical max. Absolute max is you turn purple, right? You grinded through that rep. That's absolute max. We want to go for technical max here, okay? You should live there. Don't live at absolute max. That's a one-time thing. That's maybe at the powerlifting meet. If we're absolute maxing every single week, then we're going to regress instead of progress through this type of stuff. In terms of auto-regulation here, so if the warm-ups feel slow, right, you're feeling tight, maybe you got a little, this just doesn't feel right in my hamstring or my adductor is kind of a little sore today, right, then call the top set at a heavy triple and move on. Or maybe don't do the movement at all, right? We're going to hit it again next week. Right? The gym's still going to be there. Okay. Why risk being out 6 weeks or 6 months because you wanted to do 1 rep? Okay. So if you don't feel great, don't push it. If you feel great, then push it up to a solid single. Hit it with the true intent of the effort method. Don't force that peak force output on the nervous system, on your body, on the tissues that don't have it on the day. Right? Maybe it was sleep. Maybe it was your nutrition. Maybe, your girlfriend broke up with you. Maybe there's, a million things that can be going on inside your head at any given point in time. And if your body's not feeling it, if your mind's not feeling it, then live to fight another day. In terms of volume, okay, after you hit that heavy set, you're done for max effort work, okay? You don't do 4 sets at 95%. We don't do 6 sets. We don't do 2 sets, right? That's bodybuilding. That might be ego. That might just be, something that you saw someone else do, right? That's not it, okay? Max effort, true max effort is 1 heavy set, the heaviest you can do on the day, and then that's it. And then let's go do our accessory work. All right, so to wrap this up, let's go through some common screw-ups that people will make with the max effort lower methods, right? What are some different myths? What are some misconceptions, okay? What are things that people do wrong or think that they know about it that's not really true? So the first is going to be treating max effort day like any old leg day, right? Doing brutal 1 repetition maxes and then doing 10 more sets of back squats. There are powerlifting programs that will do back down sets. I talked about it, that you can still do variations of the movement for more volume. But that's not what this is all about, okay? You're not bodybuilding. We're not trying to just push heavy intensity, heavy volume. We're going to trash the CNS if we do that, right? Once you're done with the main lift, move on and live on for the rest of the day, get your accessory work, get in and get out. Second one is going to be never really rotating through the variations, right? You're staying with the exact same movement. And maybe it's a low bar back squat every Monday and you do it for 12 weeks straight, right? The result from that is just going to be soreness, probably some pretty beat up joints. Your back's probably not going to feel great. Your hips probably aren't going to feel great. Mentally, you're just going to get stagnated, right? You've been doing the exact same thing week in and week out. It's not fun. And then ultimately, that's going to lead to stalled progress, right? You're not going to ever really get stronger because we've adapted now and we're just trying to keep throwing more adaptation and it's just not going to be there. Okay, so that progress is going to start to stall. You need to hit different angles. We need to train different muscle groups. We need to train the variations that lead to a stronger, ultimately, back squat, right? And we want to progress through it, and we want to rotate through those variations. Third one is going to be ego lifting with, I would call them like junk positions, trash positions, terrible form, right? We're chasing a sloppy PR. Cute girl over there in the corner of the gym. She wants to watch me squat. I'm going to put another plate on the bar, right? And then we're keeping our back hunched over. We didn't hit depth. We could barely lock it out. Maybe you freaking missed the lift. We never want to miss lifts, right? If we're missing lifts, we're doing something wrong. We've got way too much weight on the bar, or we're just not ready for that type of stuff yet. So if we're missing lifts, if you can't hit your depth, if you can't brace properly, then don't force it on the day, okay? Be smart when you're in the gym, and train through what you need to train to hit and be able to develop your strength. And that's why we're training this type of stuff. And then the last myth, or last kind of just misstep, I wouldn't really call this one a myth, but it's more of a misstep, is you don't have any type of recovery plan in place. I've already talked about being able to separate your lifts from, about 72 hours between lifts, okay? But we also want to make sure that we're sleeping, okay? Are we getting 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep a night? 6 at a minimum, 8 is our sweet spot, right? Are we eating enough? Are we fueling enough before the session, after the session, the day before the session even, right? Are we getting enough protein, carbohydrates? Maybe we're under eating, or maybe we're fasting. And if you train in the morning and you're not eating and then you go in and hit a heavy max effort movement, there's a lot that you're leaving there on the table because there's just no energy on board to be able to power through that. Another option here, another example is like trying to PR deadlift the day after you hit a really hard conditioning session. Okay. Maybe that Sunday before your Monday max effort, you went out on a 10-mile run. You might be super beat up. Is that the right thing to do to train this max effort squat, or this max effort deadlift the day after doing something like that? Okay. Make sure that you respect the max effort work just like you would respect that long run, right? Or even a race. If you're prepping for a race, if you're prepping for an event, okay, you want to be able to make this sustainable for the long haul. This is something that you can certainly do for years. Okay, this isn't a 12-week program. You do it for 12 weeks and then you move on to the next thing. You could theoretically run this program year in and year out. I've done it, and I still run it even whenever I'm training for other goals and other events. So to wrap up, right, that is max effort lower body training. I've tried to go through how we program it, the different variations that are available, how to train with it smart, right? What does it actually develop? What does it do? And why should you use it in your own programming? So I appreciate you for tuning in to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If you got value from this episode, then hit subscribe, leave a quick rating or leave a review, and make sure that you share this with a friend who also trains just as hard as you do. That's it for today's episode, and I will catch you next week.